My name is Haley, and I'm 31. 14 years ago on Thanksgiving, my adoptive parents forced me onto an international flight for a fake student exchange, instantly canceling my return trip and blocking my number. At just 17, I was stranded in a foreign land without knowing a word of the language, dumped right into the state foster system when their payments deliberately failed. My adoptive mom refused to even make eye contact as she shut the car door at the airport. "Your actual relatives live in Europe," she coldly stated. "You were never part of our family." I survived the wreckage. I mastered a foreign tongue, paid my own way through college, and became a structural engineer. I finally buried the past. Then an Italian attorney called, announcing a €31 million inheritance from a grandmother I thought was dead, and the same parents who threw me away came crawling right back, aggressively demanding their cut. The ringing of my cell phone cut through the quiet hum of my Milan engineering office. Outside, a freezing rain battered the glass. I was leaning over my desk, my red pen tracing the load-bearing walls of a commercial renovation project. I calculate stress points for a living. I know exactly how much pressure a foundation can take before it cracks. I glanced at the screen, an unknown number. Florence area code. I pressed the phone to my ear, keeping my eyes on the blueprints. Haley Abbott. Signorina Abbott? The voice on the other end was perfectly measured. It carried the heavy, quiet authority of old money and legal precision. My name is Giovanni Paolo Donati. I am an estate attorney based in Florence. My pen stopped moving. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Estate attorneys only called for one reason: death. But I had no one left to lose. "I am calling regarding Maria Di Lorenzo," he said, his tone dropping a fraction lower. "Your maternal grandmother." My fingers went numb. The red pen slipped, leaving a jagged ink scar across the clean white paper. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "There's a mistake. My grandmother died when I was a child. I have no family in Italy." The silence that stretched across the line felt heavier than the rain outside. "I deeply regret to inform you, Signorina, that the people who raised you lied," Donati said softly. "Signora Di Lorenzo passed away 3 weeks ago. She was 90. I stopped breathing. The office around me, the drafting tables, the hum of the heater, the city traffic below seemed to just vanish. My adoptive parents, Robert and Donna, had looked me in the eye when I was a little girl and told me my mother's family was entirely dead. They had built a wall of lies so thick I had never even thought to look past it. "Are you still there, Signorina Abbott?" "Yes," I choked out. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white, desperately grounding myself against the solid wood. "I didn't know. She knew you were told lies," Donna continued, the rustle of heavy paper echoing through the speaker. "She left specific instructions in her will to explain everything to you. You are her sole beneficiary, Haley." The word hit me like a physical blow. Sole beneficiary. She left you everything. The historical Olive Grove estate in Tuscany, the family palazzo, her private art collection, and all financial investments. The estate is valued at approximately €31 million. I stared blindly at the structural plans in front of me. 31 million. The number was so massive it didn't even sound real. It was abstract. Absurd. "There is something else," Donachie said, his voice tightening with a sudden emotional weight. "Your grandmother hired private investigators to find you after you vanished into the Italian foster system. When she finally located you, you were already an adult, fiercely independent. She chose not to disrupt the life you were fighting so hard to build." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But she watched you. She anonymously funded the university grant that paid for your engineering degree." My throat closed entirely. A hot tear slipped down my cheek, dropping onto the blueprints. A stranger who shared my blood had stood in the shadows, watching me struggle, watching me survive, and secretly paid for the very foundation of my life. "Why didn't she just knock on my door?" I whispered, my voice breaking. "She left a letter explaining her reasons," Donati replied gently. "But right now, we have a severe, immediate threat to deal with. Someone is attempting to freeze the estate and contest the will in court." The cold shock in my chest instantly warped into a sharp, defensive spike of adrenaline. "Who?" "Your adoptive parents," Donati said, the disgust clear in his voice. "Robert and Donna Abbott." I sat on the cold hardwood floor of my Milan apartment, the city lights casting long, sharp shadows across the room. A glass of amber whiskey sat untouched in my hand. As an engineer, I know exactly how things break. Usually there are warning signs. Hairline fractures in the concrete, a slight sag in a support beam. But sometimes a structure suffers a catastrophic failure. It just collapses all at once, burying everything underneath it. That is what hearing Robert and Donna's names felt like, a total, devastating collapse. 14 years of buried memories clawed their way out of the dark, dragging me backward. Thanksgiving night, I was 17 years old. There was no turkey roasting in the oven that year. The Abbott house was spotless, sterile, and freezing. The silence in the dining room was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. I had learned early on that existing too loudly in their house was a mistake. Asking questions only led to Donna's theatrical, dramatic tears and Robert's cold, calculating anger. So I sat quietly, staring at my empty plate, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. Then Robert stood up. He walked to his study and returned with a thick manila envelope. He dropped it on the table in front of me. It landed with a heavy, flat smack. "Get your coat," he said. His voice was completely empty. It was the same tone he used when firing contractors over the phone. I looked toward the hallway. Donna was already standing by the front door, wrapped in her expensive winter coat. Beside her sat my suitcase, just one, packed with a random assortment of my clothes. "What's going on?" I asked. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs. My hands started to shake as I opened the envelope. Inside was a passport and a plane ticket. One way, to Naples, Italy. "Your real family is in Italy," Donna said from the doorway. She refused to look at me. Her eyes remained locked on the frosted glass of the door, her jaw set in a hard, rigid line. "Your mother died there. Your people are there. We enrolled you in a cultural immersion program for your senior year. It's time you learn where you came from." She finally turned her head, offering a dismissive, heartbreaking shrug. "You've never really been ours, Haley. We tried, but it's time." Through the cracked window, the warm, savory smell of roasting turkey drifted over from the neighbor's house. I could hear faint laughter from next door. The contrast was physically sickening. Panic seized my throat. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Please," I begged, the tears spilling over hot and fast. "Please, what did I do? I'll do better. I'll study harder. I'll get higher grades. I won't take up so much space. Please don't send me away." Robert didn't blink. He just checked his gold wristwatch. "The car's running," he said. They drove me to JFK International Airport in total, suffocating silence. The windshield wipers slapped rhythmically against the glass, pushing away the freezing autumn rain. Donna sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead into the dark. She never turned around, not once. When we pulled up to the bright lights of the departure terminal, she stayed in the car. Robert walked me to the curb. He handed me my cheap suitcase and a white envelope with a handwritten address in Naples. "Your host family is expecting you," he said smoothly. He didn't hug me. He didn't wish me luck. He simply turned around, got back into the idling car, and drove away, leaving me shivering on the pavement in my sweatpants. I got on that plane terrified, believing I was going to a strict overseas program to fix whatever was so fundamentally broken inside me that my own parents didn't want me. But a week after I arrived in Naples, the real nightmare began. The Italian host family screamed at me and threw my bag onto the street because the cashier's check Robert had provided them bounced. The program organizers suddenly stopped answering their phones. Standing in an alleyway, crying and completely lost, I tried calling my parents. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected or is no longer in service." They had changed their numbers. I was stranded. The Italian police found me sleeping near a train station because Robert and Donna had formally sent an email to the U.S. Embassy stating they were relinquishing their parental rights due to my unmanageable behavioral issues, and because I was weeks away from turning 18, I slipped right through the cracks of international law. I was dumped into a state-run group home in Naples. I was a terrified teenager who didn't speak a single word of Italian, stripped of my family, my home, and my identity in the blink of an eye. They told me my mother died in Naples. She didn't. I learned years later from public records that she died in Rome in a tragic car accident when I was 3. Even that small, sacred piece of my history, they lied about that too. Sitting on the floor of my Milan apartment, the whiskey still in my hand, the grief finally burned away. What replaced it was a cold, razor-sharp focus. 14 years after they discarded me like broken machinery, they wanted my inheritance. They were about to learn that the girl they threw away didn't exist anymore. My phone buzzed again, a harsh, mechanical vibration against the cold floorboards. Morning had crept into my apartment, gray and washed out by the endless Milan rain. It was a text from Signor Donati. "Call me tomorrow. There is something in the adoption file you need to see." The legal grounds for their lawsuit are disturbing. The legal documents arrived by secure courier an hour later. The sharp knock at my door made me jump. When I took the thick, sealed envelope from the courier, the paper felt unnaturally heavy in my hands, like a physical weight trying to drag me back down into the dark. I spread the documents across my kitchen island. I read the complaint 4 times. The legal language was dense, but as an engineer, I decode complex structural systems every day. This wasn't a standard legal claim. It was an ambush. Robert and Donna Abbott, plaintiffs versus estate of Maria Di Lorenzo. Their argument wasn't just simple. It was deeply malicious. They weren't claiming direct inheritance. Instead, they had filed a claim under a twisted interpretation of cross-border financial proxy laws. They claimed that when they adopted me, they entered into an implied financial trust with my biological family. They were suing the estate for fraudulent concealment, demanding millions in reimbursement for child-rearing expenses and profound emotional distress. But the next page made my blood run entirely cold. To freeze the assets, they had filed an injunction claiming I was mentally unstable. They had attached heavily redacted, completely fabricated therapy records from my childhood to build a narrative of a broken, unpredictable girl. Based on those lies, they were petitioning for a legal conservatorship over me. They wanted to manage the $31 million on my behalf. They were asking the court for an $18.6 million settlement for their troubles. My hands shook so badly I dropped the papers. The pages scattered across the marble counter. I called Sarah, my best friend and a senior architect at my firm. She is the most grounded, solid person I know. Within 20 minutes, she was at my door, bringing 2 black coffees and a blast of damp, freezing air from the hallway. "What is it?" Sarah asked, taking one look at my pale face. She set the coffees down and picked up the thick stack of papers. I watched Sarah's sharp, dark eyes scan the legalese. The silence in the kitchen stretched, thick and suffocating. A small muscle in Sarah's jaw twitched. Her fingers gripped the edges of the paper so tightly the sheets wrinkled. "They can't actually win this conservatorship garbage, can they?" I asked. My voice trembled with a sickening mixture of old childhood fear and pure adult rage. "Sarah, I'm a licensed structural engineer. I manage multi-million euro projects. I calculate load paths that keep hundreds of people safe. I'm not mentally unfit." Sarah tossed the papers onto the island with a sharp smack. "They're not trying to win a trial, Haley," she said, her voice low and dangerously calm. She leaned heavily against the counter, crossing her arms. "This is a siege tactic. They're trying to financially bleed the estate in legal fees and pressure you into a corner." She looked at me, her expression softening just a fraction. "They know you hate conflict. They know you spent your whole life trying to hide from them. They're betting you'll panic and pay them a few million just to make them go away and keep your name out of the European tabloids." She was exactly right. I had spent 14 years building a quiet, safe life specifically to forget these people existed. The thought of a public, humiliating court battle made my stomach twist into painful knots. How did they even find out about the inheritance? I asked, rubbing my temples as a vicious headache bloomed behind my eyes. "I only learned about it yesterday. The timing doesn't make sense." Sarah sighed heavily. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her thumb hesitated over the screen for a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of deep pity, before she handed it to me. "Donna," she said simply. I looked at the bright screen. It was a Facebook post from Donna, a long, aggressively tearful message about the beloved daughter we lost to a tragic, rebellious phase, and how our deeply loving family is being torn apart by European legal greed. She had tagged my old dormant American account. I watched the screen in absolute horror. The post already had 4,500 shares. Buried in the hundreds of sympathetic comments, someone had linked an obscure Italian legal notice regarding the Di Lorenzo estate, writing, "I heard she inherited millions from some overseas relative. Her poor parents raised her, and now she's cutting them out." I felt completely exposed, stripped bare in front of thousands of strangers. Donna had engineered the entire narrative before I even knew there was a story to tell. She was playing the heartbroken victim to an audience of thousands, laying the foundation for her lies, just like she always did. The sudden, harsh buzzing of my phone sliced through the heavy silence of the kitchen. It was sitting on the cold marble island, vibrating violently against the stone. I stared down at the bright screen. It was an unknown American number, but I recognized the Massachusetts area code instantly. A cold spike of pure adrenaline shot straight through my chest. For 14 years I had dreaded this exact moment. Sarah stepped forward, her hand reaching for the phone. "Don't answer it, Haley. Let it go to voicemail. I'll screen it for you." I looked at the blueprints still spread out on my dining table in the other room. In structural engineering, when you find a severe stress fracture in a support column, you don't look away. You don't ignore it and hope the building stands. You face the damage directly before it brings the whole structure down. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. "No," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I need to hear it." I picked up the phone, hit the green button, and put it on speaker. I set it gently back down on the marble. "Hello? Haley, sweetie." The voice was thick, wet with practiced theatrical tears. "Donna." My stomach dropped, an old conditioned reflex from childhood. Her voice hadn't changed at all. It was the exact same soft, syrupy tone she used whenever she wanted to manipulate a neighbor, charm a teacher, or gaslight me into believing I was the problem. "We need to talk," Donna sniffled. The sound was so perfectly timed it felt scripted. I looked at Sarah. Sarah's eyes were dark with quiet fury. "Donna," I said. I forced my voice to be as flat, cold, and lifeless as poured concrete. "Why are you trying to declare me mentally unfit in a federal court filing? Why are you suing my grandmother's estate?" "Suing?" Donna let out a wounded, dramatic gasp. "Honey, that's such an ugly word. We're not suing you. We're just trying to protect what's fair for our family. You don't understand the complex legal paperwork, sweetie." "What family?" I asked, the words clipping sharply off my tongue. "You told me I was never part of yours. You abandoned me in Naples." "Oh, Haley," her voice cracked perfectly. "A masterful performance. You were so young, you misunderstood everything. We sent you to a beautiful cultural program to help you find your roots. When you ran away and got involved with the Italian authorities, it broke our hearts. We thought it was what you needed." I stared at the phone. She was actually trying to rewrite history. She was trying to paint a picture of a loving family desperately trying to help a troubled teen, erasing the reality of the freezing airport, the bouncing check, and the blocked phone numbers. Before I could tear her lie apart, I heard a muffled sound in the background, a heavy clearing of a throat. Then the line shifted. "Haley, let's not make this adversarial. Robert." His voice was smooth, deep, and entirely devoid of warmth. It was his corporate negotiation voice, the tone he used to close multi-million-dollar deals and crush smaller competitors. "Your grandmother, rest her soul. She didn't know our family," Robert continued effortlessly. "She didn't know how much we sacrificed financially to give you a decent life in America. If she had known the truth, she would have absolutely wanted us included in the estate. We're just claiming what's owed for raising you." The sheer audacity of it knocked the breath out of me for a second. "You sent me away with a single suitcase," I said, my voice beginning to shake with a rage I hadn't felt in over a decade. "You bounced the check to the host family. You blocked my phone number when I was wandering the streets crying."
"We gave you tough love so you'd find your heritage,"
Robert countered smoothly, not missing a single beat. It was like talking to a brick wall.
"That's entirely different. And look at you now. You're a successful engineer."
"You turned out fine. That proves our parenting decisions were exactly right." A laugh clawed its way out of my throat. It was a harsh barking sound that echoed off the kitchen tiles and scared even me.
"You're serious?" I asked, gripping the edge of the marble island. "You actually believe your own delusion? You think you built me?"
"We believe in family," Robert said firmly, lowering his voice to sound disappointed. "Unlike some people who let European money change them into someone cold and unrecognizable." The rain outside suddenly lashed against the window in a heavy sheet. The sound broke the spell. I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't shivering in sweatpants at JFK. I was a 31-year-old woman in my own home, standing on my own 2 feet. "Here's what I believe," I said. My voice dropped an octave, solidifying into absolute steel. "I believe I am done with this conversation. I believe your lawyers can speak to Signor Donati, and I believe that if you ever try to contact me directly again, I will have the Milan police file harassment charges. Haley, be reasonable." Robert's corporate mask slipped, a flash of real anger snapping in his tone. "Goodbye, Robert." I reached out and ended the call. The kitchen plunged back into the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the steady drumming of the rain. My hands were shaking violently. I had to press them flat against the cold marble to steady them. But deep inside my chest, where the old terrified child used to hide, a heavy stone of resolve clicked permanently into place. I had spent my entire adult life wondering what I would say to them if they ever resurfaced. I had run through 1,000 scenarios in the dark. Now I knew. I didn't owe them my tears. I didn't owe them closure. I owed them absolutely nothing. And I was going to fight them with everything I had. 4 days passed. For 96 hours, the silence in my apartment felt like the quiet right before a massive structural failure. I went to work. I drank my coffee. I ran complex structural simulations on my computer, but my chest remained tight, coiled like a compressed spring waiting to snap. I knew they wouldn't just walk away. A predator doesn't let go of a multi-million-dollar prize just because the prey says no. On Thursday evening, Sarah and I were sitting on my living room couch, going over the legal defense strategy Donati had emailed us. Suddenly, my phone lit up. An unknown local number, a burner phone. I stared at the glowing screen. The tension in the room instantly spiked. I answered, putting the phone down on the glass coffee table and pressing the speaker button. "Sweetie pie, please don't shut us out." Donna's voice trembled into the quiet room. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. She sounded small, fragile, and desperate, but I could hear the faint, hollow echo of a hotel room in the background. They were already in Europe. They were hunting me. "We miss you so much," Donna continued, her breath hitching perfectly. "All those years apart, wondering where you were. It broke my heart, Haley." I looked at Sarah. Sarah's dark eyes narrowed, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I wanted to understand the absolute depth of the delusion I was dealing with, so I let her talk. "Mommy just wants to make things right," Donna purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We can be a family again. All this legal nonsense, this conservatorship thing, it's just paperwork our lawyers suggested to protect you from gold diggers. What matters is that we love you." I felt my jaw tighten. "If you love me," I said slowly, testing the weight of the lie, "why did you claim I have a history of severe psychiatric instability in a federal court filing?" "We're protecting you, honey," Donna cried out, a fraction too loud. "That Italian lawyer, he doesn't have your best interests at heart. He's just after his percentage. But we know you. We raised you." There was a tiny click on the line, a sharp intake of breath, and then Robert's voice took over. He sounded deeply reasonable, like a father trying to soothe a confused child. "Haley, let's meet in person." "In Tuscany," Robert said smoothly. "We flew over here to see you. We'll sit down at a cafe like a real family and sort this out without lawyers poisoning everything." Without lawyers. Just us, the people who mattered. I looked at Sarah. She leaned forward, her face pale, and silently mouthed one word, "trap." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. "Why not?" Donna asked. For a microsecond, her voice sharpened into a jagged blade, the maternal warmth vanishing entirely. Then, just as quickly, she forced it back into a soft, wounded whimper. "Honey, we're your parents. You can trust us. You drove me to an airport in sweatpants, lied about a study abroad program, and left me to become a ward of the Italian state," I said. Silence stretched over the line. It was a heavy, suffocating pause. When Robert finally spoke, his tone dripped with thick, heavy condescension. "You're remembering it wrong due to your trauma, Haley," he said, using my pain as a weapon against me. "You begged to go. You were curious about Italy." My blood ran completely cold. The gaslighting was so bold, so absolute, it made me dizzy. "I was crying," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I begged you on my knees in the hallway not to send me away. Teenagers cry about everything, it's a phase." "I am a 31-year-old woman," I cut him off, my voice echoing off the apartment walls, ringing with authority. "And I am not remembering it wrong." Donna made a small wounded sound like a kicked puppy. "You're breaking my heart, Haley. You broke mine first." I terminated the call. I didn't wait to process the shaking in my hands. I immediately dialed Signor Donati. "They want to meet in Tuscany," I told him the second he answered. "Without lawyers." They called it a family discussion. "Absolutely not." Donati's voice cracked through the speaker like a whip. "That is a classic intimidation tactic. They want to ambush you, record the conversation, gaslight you, and pressure you into signing a preliminary settlement before we can dismantle their conservatorship claim in court." "I figured," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "But Signor Donati, part of me wants to look them in the eye. I need them to know I am not that terrified 17-year-old anymore."
Signorina Abbott, Haley, he sighed. The sharp, professional edge of his voice suddenly gave way to a heavy, terrible sadness. Before you make any decisions about facing them, there is something crucial I need to tell you. I have been digging through the sealed adoption records from the United States. I sat up straight, my professional instincts kicking in. What did you find? Robert Abbott worked in corporate banking in the late 1990s in Boston. I summed. Specifically, he managed international wire transfers and offshore trusts for high-net-worth European clients. He paused. The silence on the line felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, including the Di Lorenzo family. The room tilted violently. The breath rushed out of my lungs as if I had been punched. I looked at Sarah, wide-eyed and terrified. I stammered, my brain struggling to process the impossible math. He knew about my grandmother's wealth before they even adopted me? It appears so, Donati said quietly. I couldn't prove malicious intent purely based on his employment, but the timeline is deeply suspicious. However, I have a contact, a retired social worker in Boston who handled adoptions during that specific period. She has been following the media circus your adoptive mother started online.
And? I whispered. The social worker reached out to me directly on an encrypted line. Donata continued, the suspense thick in his voice. She says she has documentary evidence. She used an interesting phrase, Haley. She said she wanted to atone for her silence. That evening, an email arrived from a woman named Cynthia Davis. The subject line read, I am so sorry I didn't speak up sooner. They showed up anyway. I was sitting in Signor Donata's stunning wood-paneled office in Florence a week later. Outside, the Tuscan rain was a steady gray sheet against the tall glass windows. Inside, the room smelled of old paper, rich mahogany, and dark roasted coffee. We were reviewing the estate's financial disclosures. To me, looking at financial spreadsheets is like looking at the blueprints of a building. You follow the numbers like load-bearing beams to see exactly where the weight is supported, and where the structure is secretly failing. Suddenly, Donati's assistant knocked frantically on the heavy oak door. She didn't wait for an answer before pushing it open, her face flushed and panicked. Signor Donati, she breathed, her eyes darting to me. There are people in the lobby causing a severe disturbance. They claim to be Signorina Abbott's parents, and they have someone recording on a cell phone. My blood instantly turned to ice. My pen stopped dead on the financial ledger. Tell building security to escort them out immediately, Donati ordered, standing up so fast his leather chair scraped loudly against the floor. He reached for his desk phone. No, I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I didn't recognize it. It sounded like the voice I use on a construction site when a crane is lifting a dangerous load overhead. Absolute authority. Absolute focus. Signorina, Donati warned, his hand pausing over the receiver. You do not have to do this. This is exactly the ambush we predicted. I know, I said, slowly standing up from the leather guest chair. But they brought an audience. If I hide behind locked doors, Donna plays the terrified victim who was turned away by her cruel daughter. She controls the story. I need to see their faces. I need to break the narrative. Donati assessed my posture for a long second, his sharp eyes searching mine. Then he offered a single, stiff nod. I am right beside you. We walked out of the inner office, our footsteps echoing sharply against the polished marble floor of the corridor. As we turned the corner into the wide, sunlit lobby, I saw them. There they were. Robert was wearing a perfectly tailored navy blazer and crisp trousers, looking like he had just stepped off a luxury yacht in Capri. His posture was commanding, his shoulders squared to dominate the room. Donna was wearing a soft, pale floral dress, a carefully chosen outfit to make her look harmless and maternal. She was already dabbing her eyes with a white tissue for the benefit of the bewildered receptionist, and the phone camera pointed at us. But it was the third person standing nervously beside them that made my breath hitch. Morgan, the biological daughter they had miraculously conceived 3 years after adopting me. The golden child, the one who got private violin lessons, elite summer camps, and the sprawling sunlit downstairs bedroom with the bay window, while I was relegated to the drafty, freezing attic. She had grown up. She was 26 now, wearing a wrinkled beige coat, clutching her purse to her chest with white-knuckled fingers. She looked absolutely terrified. Haley, Donna gasped, her voice echoing dramatically off the marble walls. She rushed forward, her arms wide open, tears streaming down her carefully powdered cheeks. I didn't step back, I just raised one hand, my palm flat and solid like a concrete wall.
Do not touch me. Donna froze instantly, her arms dropped. Her face crumpled into a mask of pure, agonizing devastation, perfectly timed for the camera holding her in its frame. Sweetie, please, you're breaking my heart. I am not your sweetie, I said, keeping my voice low and dangerous. I am not your daughter. I am nothing to you.
Robert stepped forward instantly, putting a heavy, controlling hand on Donna's shoulder. He gripped her like a prop, pulling her slightly behind him. He looked down at me, his face a mask of stern, disappointed authority. Haley, there is absolutely no need for this theatrical hostility, Robert boomed, his deep voice carrying easily across the lobby. We flew all this way across the world because we love you. We are your family. The least you can do is show some basic respect, lower your voice, and hear us out. You came uninvited, I stated smoothly, refusing to shrink under his gaze. You are deliberately interfering with active legal proceedings. You are attempting to declare me mentally incompetent in a court of law. And you brought... I shifted my gaze to Morgan. She flinched. The guilt swimming in her pale blue eyes was heavy and painful to look at. A dark, twisted knot tightened in my chest. I knew what it felt like to be manipulated by Robert Abbott. She wasn't an enemy. She was just another pawn on his chessboard. Why are you here, Morgan? I asked, softening my tone only for her. Morgan's voice was a shaky, ragged whisper. They told me you were sick, Haley. They said you were having a breakdown and needed family. They said we could finally be real sisters again. The lie was so cruel it made my teeth ache. You're not part of this, Morgan, I told her, my eyes locked on hers. Go home. This isn't about family. It's about a 31 million euro bank account. Donna let out a loud, wailing sob. She turned to the shocked receptionist, and then to Signor Donati, her hands flying to her chest. You see what this European money has turned her into? We lost our beautiful, sweet daughter to greed. Signor Donati stepped smoothly between us, cutting off Donna's line of sight to me. His posture was immaculate, tall, and deeply intimidating. Signora Abbott, Donati said, his voice dropping into a chilling, absolute freeze. My client has explicitly asked you to maintain your distance. I strongly suggest you respect that boundary right now, before I have the Carabinieri arrest you both for criminal trespassing and harassment. Boundary? Robert scoffed loudly. His face flushed a dark, angry red, the polished corporate mask finally cracking to reveal the ugly rage underneath. He pointed a thick finger at Donati. Family doesn't have boundaries. We are her legal parents. We raised her. Not anymore, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting like a steel blade. I stared dead into his eyes, letting him see that the terrified 17-year-old girl in the sweatpants was entirely gone. Get out. After building security finally escorted them out onto the wet street, with Robert loudly threatening lawsuits echoing down the marble hall, Signor Donati closed the heavy oak door to his inner office. The loud click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. He didn't sit down. He walked straight to his massive mahogany desk, unlocked a bottom drawer with a small brass key, and pulled out a worn, unusually thick manila folder. He set it down on the desk in front of me. It landed with a dull, heavy thud. I was going to wait until the official mediation, Donati said. He poured me a glass of cold water from a glass pitcher, noticing my shaking hands. But I think you need the armor this will give you right now. He spread several yellowing documents across the smooth wood. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was official adoption agency paperwork, dated 1998. These are copies from your original unredacted file, Donati explained, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Your grandmother spent millions in legal fees trying to obtain these years ago. She needed to understand why you were being kept from her. I leaned over the desk, scanning the pages. Standard forms, psychological evaluations, home study reports. Then my eyes locked onto a single paragraph at the bottom of page 4. It was highlighted in bright, aggressive yellow ink. Family background of child. Maternal grandmother, Maria Di Lorenzo, residing in Tuscany, Italy. Sole heir to the Di Lorenzo estate. Significant liquid assets, historical properties, and corporate holdings reported. I read the words 3 times. My brain simply refused to process them. As an engineer, I am used to finding flaws in a design, but this was a total corruption of the very foundation. They knew, I whispered. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. They knew about the money before they even signed the final adoption papers. Signor Donati pointed a silver pen at a handwritten note attached to the file. This is an internal memo from the agency caseworker Cynthia Davis. She flagged their application. She noted that Robert Abbott asked highly specific, highly inappropriate questions regarding your biological grandmother's estate, international inheritance laws, and trust protocols. She explicitly wrote the word concerning next to his name. I felt sick, but they gave me to them anyway. Budget cuts, institutional understaffing, and Robert Abbott's immaculate corporate facade, Donati said softly, his eyes filled with dark pity. You know how the system fails children, Haley. I stared blankly at the yellow paper. 14 years of my life, the emotional abuse, the constant suffocating feeling that I was a burden, the freezing attic room, the Thanksgiving abandonment, all of it, my entire childhood had just been reduced to a long-term financial gamble. Your grandmother tried to make contact when you were 9 years old, Donati continued. His voice was heavy with deep empathy. She sent letters, photographs of your mother, birthday gifts, trust fund documents. I looked up, my vision suddenly blurring. I never saw a single letter. I know, he said. The Abbotts returned every single item unopened. They attached aggressive legal cease and desist letters drafted by Robert's corporate firm. They legally changed your middle name to sever the paper trails. They told your grandmother that you hated your Italian heritage, that the mere mention of her caused you severe psychological distress, and that if she ever contacted you again, they would have her arrested for harassment. So she just gave up? No, he said fiercely. She hired private investigators, but they deliberately isolated you. When your grandmother finally found you in the foster system in Naples, you were 18. You had already built walls made of iron. She was terrified that revealing herself would validate the Abbotts' lies, that she was trying to buy you. She didn't want to intrude on the independent life you were fighting so hard to build. She watched me suffer for 14 years, I argued, the tears finally spilling over my lashes. She watched you succeed, he corrected gently. There is a profound difference, and when she saw you wanted to be an engineer, she established the anonymous grant that paid your tuition. She wanted you to know you could conquer the world on your own. And then, when she passed, she wanted to give you the world. My eyes burned. The realization was completely overwhelming. I was never unloved. I was just hidden from the love that belonged to me. There is one more thing, he said, tapping a printed email on the desk. The social worker Cynthia Davis, she has the final piece of the puzzle. She is flying to Florence next month. She is willing to testify against them in court. That night, I sat alone in my dark apartment. The only light came from the screen of my phone. The rain tapped gently against the glass as I read Cynthia Davis's email. I read it so many times the words began to blur together. Dear Haley, my name is Cynthia Davis. In 1998, I was the caseworker assigned to your adoption. I processed the paperwork for Robert and Donna Abbott. I have carried a sickening guilt about your case for 28 years. Something felt fundamentally wrong from the very beginning. The Abbotts didn't ask about your favorite foods, your sleeping habits, or your trauma. They asked about assets, properties, and inheritance potential. I noted my deep concerns in your file, but my supervisor told me I was being paranoid. They are a wealthy, upstanding family. Don't ruin this child's chance, she said. I backed down. I shouldn't have. Last month I was cleaning out my home office before moving into a retirement community. I found a backup hard drive of my old cases. While reviewing it, I found an email I had completely forgotten about. It was an email Robert Abbott accidentally CC'd to my agency email address when he was corresponding with his private wealth management attorney. The email discussed the long-term financial ROI, return on investment of the DiLorenzo child, and explicitly outlined that establishing legal parenthood was merely a prerequisite to staking a claim on the grandmother's eventual estate. The date on that email was November 18, 2011, 10 days before they put you on that plane to Italy. I am attaching a certified scan of the original server logs. I verified its authenticity with our IT department before I retired. I don't know if this helps your legal defense. I pray it destroys them. More than that, I want you to know, from the bottom of my heart, you were never the problem. You were never unlovable. You were a magnificent child who deserved a real family, and the system fed you to wolves. I am flying to Tuscany next month. I will testify under oath to whatever you need. In solidarity, Cynthia. I sat on the floor, holding my phone tight against my chest. My breath was shallow and fast in the quiet room. 10 days. They had realized my grandmother's assets were locked in a blind trust they couldn't access until her death. They realized I was becoming a teenager, costing them money without providing immediate returns. So, exactly 10 days before Thanksgiving, they calculated their losses and threw me away. All those years I had tortured myself lying awake in the freezing attic, wondering what I had done wrong, if I had just been quieter, smarter, prettier. The answer was nothing. It was never about me. It was only, always, about the math. The Abbott's legal team formally requested a mediation hearing before we went to trial over the conservatorship. Against Signor Donati's strict advice, I agreed, but I set the terms. I was the one holding the blueprints now. It would be held at a formal arbitration office in downtown Florence. Official mediators would be present. Everything would be recorded on the public record. No shadows, no secret backroom deals. When Sarah and I arrived at the sleek, glass-walled conference room on the 5th floor, the tension in the air was so thick it felt hard to breathe. I understood instantly why Robert had pushed for this meeting. He had brought his own audience. Sitting across the long, polished oak table were 2 high-powered American lawyers in expensive suits, and a woman holding an iPad who clearly looked like a crisis PR consultant. Robert was positioning this to look like a tragic, emotional misunderstanding where the rebellious, mentally unstable daughter was stealing the family's rightful due. He was managing his public image. Donna spotted me first. She was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan, looking impossibly soft, fragile, and maternal. Her eyes were already glistening with on-demand tears. "Haley, thank God," Donna whispered, her voice cracking perfectly as she reached her hand across the cold, polished oak table. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stared at her outstretched hand until the silence in the room became unbearable and she awkwardly pulled it back, dabbing her eyes for the benefit of the PR consultant. Robert got straight to business, instantly dropping the grieving father act. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, linking his fingers together. It was his classic boardroom pose.
"We've discussed this extensively with our legal team, Haley," Robert said smoothly, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "We are prepared to offer a highly generous compromise.
45% of the liquid assets. In exchange, we drop the conservatorship claim, we seal the records, and we walk away quietly. No media, no ugly trial." He smiled, a cold, corporate smile.
"It's a win-win." I looked at him.
In structural engineering, glass is a beautiful building material, but it is notoriously brittle under sudden impact. Robert thought he was sitting behind bulletproof glass. He didn't know I had a hammer. 45% of what you are not entitled to? I asked, my voice echoing off the glass walls perfectly level. Robert's smile vanished. The corporate mask slipped, revealing the raw, ugly greed underneath. "Of what we earned, Haley. 14 years of housing you, feeding you, paying for your mere existence. Do you have any concept of the immense financial strain that put on this family?" "I wasn't aware that parenting came with a retroactive invoice," I said. Donna made a small, wounded noise, clutching her cashmere sweater. "We sacrificed our best years for you." Robert passed up a senior partnership at his firm to spend more time dealing with your behavioral issues, your outbursts, your darkness. I thought about my freezing attic room. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners where I wasn't allowed to speak. I thought about the bounced check in Naples. "Is that the narrative you've practiced for the PR team?" I asked, shifting my gaze directly to the consultant with the iPad. She stiffened, avoiding my eyes. I turned back to Donna. "Let me tell you the truth, since you seem to have forgotten. My mother was a school teacher. She died in a car accident when I was 3. She was a brilliant, loving, sober woman. That's what the Italian authorities told you," Donna countered quickly, her eyes suddenly flashing with real, vicious malice. "But we saw your real medical records when we adopted you. We know what kind of broken, defective genetics you come from. We rescued you from the gutter, Haley." Sarah shifted violently in her chair beside me, her hands balling into fists. I put a hand on her arm to steady her. My own heart was pounding, but my mind was completely, terrifyingly clear. Robert leaned forward again, looking directly at his American lawyers, shaking his head mournfully. "This is exactly what we mean, gentlemen. Haley has always been psychologically fragile. We tried therapy. We tried everything. But some children," he sighed, a heavy theatrical sound, "blood will tell. She is simply not competent to manage a 31 million euro estate. We are trying to save her from herself." The American lawyers nodded sympathetically, taking notes on their yellow legal pads. I stood up. The heavy leather chair scraped loudly against the floor. The anger inside me wasn't hot and chaotic anymore. It was absolute zero.
It was the freezing, unyielding cold of a steel beam bearing massive weight without bending. "I am done here," I said, looking down at the people who had terrorized my childhood. "The next time we speak, it will be in front of an Italian judge, and I will bring documentation that proves every single word out of your mouth is perjury." Robert actually smirked. He leaned back in his chair, arrogant and completely secure in his delusion. "Documentation? You have nothing but teenage angst and a victim complex, Haley. You can beat us in court." I leaned forward, planting my hands flat on the oak table, bringing my face inches from his. "You should have been more careful about who you CC'd on your emails in 1998, Robert." His smirk vanished instantly. The color completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror. I didn't wait for him to speak.
I turned around and walked out of the glass room, leaving them suffocating in the silence. The official court hearing was held a week later. The Florence courthouse was an imposing, centuries-old fortress of pale stone. Inside, the ceilings were painted with faded frescoes, and tall arched windows let in the cold gray light of the relentless Italian rain. A massive carved wooden coat of arms loomed on the wall behind the judge's bench. In structural engineering, we put materials into pressure chambers to find their breaking point. We apply massive crushing weight to a support beam until it either holds firm or violently splinters into pieces. Walking into that courtroom, I knew I was stepping into a pressure chamber. Today, one of our foundations was going to snap. I arrived early. Sarah sat on my left, a silent, immovable anchor. Signor Donati sat on my right, looking like a sleek, dangerous predator in a bespoke black suit. We sat on one side of a vast, polished wooden table that stretched across the floor. The Abbotts entered 10 minutes late, a pathetic, calculated power move. Robert walked in like he owned the entire building. He buttoned his expensive suit jacket with a sharp, arrogant flick of his wrists. Donna followed closely behind him, clutching her purse, already dabbing her eyes with a tissue, preparing her victim routine for the judge. But I barely looked at them. My eyes were fixed on the gallery behind us. Sitting alone in the back row was a woman in a simple gray blazer, her gray hair pulled into a neat, tight bun. Cynthia Davis. She looked older and more tired than her emails suggested, but when our eyes finally met across the echoing room, she didn't look away. She offered me a single, steady nod. She had flown thousands of miles across an ocean to slay a monster she had helped create. The heavy wooden doors in the back of the room opened. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Judge Moretti took her seat. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s, with sharp, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She settled into her high-backed leather chair and struck her wooden gavel. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot, making Donna physically jump. "This hearing concerns the contested estate of Maria Di Lorenzo, and a petition for conservatorship filed by Robert and Donna Abbott," Judge Moretti announced. Her English was flawless, sharp, and brutally precise. She looked directly at Robert over the rims of her glasses. "Mr. Abbott, before we entertain your petition regarding Signorina Abbott's mental competence, I have a preliminary question for the court record." Robert stood up smoothly, resting his hands on the table. He offered his most charming, reliable corporate smile. "Of course, Your Honor. I am an open book." Prior to finalizing the adoption of Haley in 1998, Judge Moretti asked slowly, letting every word carry weight, "Were you in any way aware of the existence, identity, and financial status of her biological grandmother, Maria Di Lorenzo?" The room went completely, terrifyingly silent. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the glass windows. Robert's smile remained perfectly fixed, glued to his face. But as I watched him, I saw it, a tiny, involuntary micro-expression. A single shining bead of sweat broke out at his temple. His jaw locked. "Absolutely not, Your Honor," Robert lied smoothly, his voice deep and steady. "We adopted out of the sheer goodness of our hearts. We wanted to give a desperate child a loving home. We had absolutely no knowledge of any foreign estate. Thank you." Judge Moretti made a slow, deliberate note with her pen. She didn't look up.
"Counsel for the respondent, you have the floor."
Signor Donati stood up. He didn't rush. He opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and held it up.
"Your Honor, I submit Exhibit A into evidence."
He handed copies to the bailiff, who walked them over to the judge and to Robert's American attorneys.
"This is an email dated February 12, 1998.
Donati stated, his deep voice carrying effortlessly to the high, painted ceiling. Exactly 5 weeks before the Abbott's adoption of Haley was legally finalized. It was sent by Robert Abbott to his private wealth attorney. It was inadvertently CC'd to the adoption agency. I watched Robert. His hands, still resting on the table, curled into tight fists. He gripped the edge of the wood so hard his knuckles turned stark white. "I will read the relevant passage for the official record," Donati continued. He didn't look at the paper. He looked dead into Robert's eyes. "The child has a maternal grandmother residing in Tuscany, Italy, holding significant liquid assets, a historical olive grove, real estate, and corporate investments. If we establish legal parenthood now, we position ourselves favorably as financial proxies for any future inheritance claims. Treat this adoption as a long-term investment vehicle." The words hung in the cold air like a guillotine blade that had just been dropped. Donna let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp, clutching her throat. That is completely fabricated. That is out of context. He meant her college fund. Signora Abbott, Judge Moretti's voice was absolute ice. She pointed her pen directly at Donna. "You will remain silent, or the bailiff will physically remove you from my courtroom." Robert's attorney was frantically flipping through his legal files, his face pale and slick with panic. "Your Honor, objection. This document was never disclosed in pretrial discovery, because it was buried in sealed offshore agency archives," Donati replied effortlessly, never breaking his calm posture. "Until Miss Cynthia Davis, the original agency caseworker, recovered it from a backup server. She is present in the gallery today, Your Honor, ready to authenticate it under penalty of perjury." Judge Moretti shifted her sharp gaze to Cynthia in the back row. Cynthia stood up, smoothing her jacket, and nodded firmly. The judge then looked back at Robert. The sheer disgust in her dark eyes was palpable. The structural beams of Robert's entire life were snapping in real time. "I have one additional item, Your Honor," Donati said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a heavy envelope sealed with red wax, a letter written by Maria Di Lorenzo herself. It was included in her will, with strict instructions to be read aloud should her estate ever be contested by the Abbotts. Judge Moretti nodded once. "Read it." Donati broke the wax seal. The crack echoed loudly. He unfolded the heavy paper. "My dearest Haley, by the time you hear this, I will be gone. I want you to know the entire truth. I knew about you from the day you were born. When your mother died, I was utterly devastated. I fought to raise you, but I was 75, living in Italy, and the U.S. authorities deemed me an unsuitable foreign guardian. When the Abbotts adopted you, I wept with gratitude. I believed you were safe. I wrote letters, I sent gifts. Every single one was returned to me, accompanied by legal threats from Robert Abbott stating you hated me, and that the mention of Italy caused you severe trauma. I believed them, until 2011. In November of that year, Robert and Donna Abbott contacted me directly through my private attorneys. They demanded 5 million euros. A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom staff. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. They stated that if I did not pay them an upbringing fee, they would discard you back into the foster system. I refused to be extorted. I believed they were bluffing. I believed no human being could do that to a child they had raised under their own roof. 10 days later, they put you on a plane, canceled your return ticket, and abandoned you to the streets of Naples. You were 17. You had absolutely nothing. And I failed you by not intervening sooner. I watched you fight your way out of the dark. I watched you become a brilliant engineer. I anonymously funded your education because I wanted to help, but I was terrified that revealing my identity would trigger the trauma the Abbotts swore they inflicted. I leave you everything I have. You were never unwanted, my sweet girl. You were loved from afar, completely and always. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the rain sliding down the glass. I was openly crying now. My chest heaved with quiet sobs, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of profound, overwhelming validation. A heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since I was a child finally permanently lifted off my shoulders. "This is ridiculous hearsay," Robert suddenly exploded. He shoved his heavy chair back, the wood screeching horribly against the floor. "That old woman was senile. She made that garbage up to ruin us. We cared for that ungrateful, broken girl." "Mr. Abbott," Judge Moretti stood up, gripping her gavel. "Sit down immediately." Donna was sobbing hysterically, real tears this time. Her carefully applied makeup was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. She reached her hands out toward me. "We loved her. We made mistakes, we were stressed, but we loved her." I stood up. I didn't look at the judge. I didn't look at Donati. I looked directly at the woman who had locked me out of her heart for 14 years. You contacted my grandmother and demanded a €5 million ransom for me, I said. My voice was low, trembling, but it cut through her theatrics like a diamond saw through glass. When she refused to pay your ransom, you drove me to an airport and abandoned a child in a foreign country. That is not a parenting mistake, Donna. That is human trafficking. You used me as a lottery ticket, and when the ticket didn't pay out fast enough, you threw it in the trash. You owe us, Robert screamed, completely losing his polished corporate composure. His face was purple with rage. His lawyer grabbed his arm, desperately trying to pull him down, but Robert shoved the man away violently. We gave you an American life. You are nothing without us. You belong to us. Suddenly, a small, violently shaking voice cut through the chaos from the gallery. It's true. Everyone turned. Morgan had stood up. She was trembling so violently she had to grip the wooden pew in front of her to stay on her feet. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. I heard them, Morgan said. Her voice echoed in the shocked silence, gaining strength with every word. Years ago, I was 14. They were drinking in the kitchen, fighting about the firm facing bankruptcy. Dad said Haley was a losing bet. He said they should have cut their losses on her sooner. He bragged about dumping her in Italy so he wouldn't have to pay for college. Donna's face drained of all color. She looked like she had seen a ghost. Morgan, sweetie, no. You're confused, you're upset. Please sit down. I am exactly right, Morgan screamed, thick tears streaming down her pale face. She looked directly at me, her expression totally shattered by guilt and grief. I am so sorry, Haley. I should have told someone. I knew it was wrong. I was just so scared they would throw me away too. Morgan, shut your mouth, Robert roared, pointing a shaking finger at his biological daughter. No, Dad. Morgan shook her head fiercely, stepping back toward the exit. I am done being terrified of you. Judge Moretti struck her gavel repeatedly. Bang, 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 until the room fell dead silent. She slowly sat back down. Her face was a mask of pure, terrifying judicial fury. I have heard more than enough, Judge Moretti declared, folding her hands tightly on the desk. The petition for conservatorship is not only denied, it is profoundly offensive to this court. The financial claim brought against the estate by Robert and Donna Abbott is rejected in its entirety, with extreme prejudice. Donna let out a loud wail of pure animal despair, burying her face in her hands. Robert's attorney slumped into his chair, rubbing his forehead. Furthermore, Judge Moretti continued, her voice ringing like an alarm bell, the evidence presented today demonstrates a staggering level of premeditated fraud, financial extortion, and international child abandonment. This is no longer a civil family dispute. She looked dead at Robert. This is a criminal enterprise. Robert's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a building that had just been demolished from the inside. The petitioners will bear all legal costs for both parties, the judge ordered. I am immediately forwarding this entire transcript, along with the caseworker's files and the grandmother's letter, to Interpol and the United States Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am officially requesting a criminal probe into adoption fraud, wire fraud, and child abandonment. The words landed like physical blows. Robert collapsed heavily into his chair, staring blankly at the polished table.
This hearing is concluded, Judge Moretti announced.
She gathered her files, then paused. She looked directly at me, and for a fraction of a second, the harsh, furious lines of her face softened.
Signorina Abbott, you are a remarkable, resilient woman. Your grandmother's legacy is in excellent hands.
Then, she stood up and was gone. As I turned to leave, Donna broke away from the table. She rushed toward me, hands outstretched, her eyes wide and feral with sheer panic.
Haley, please, Donna screamed, her voice cracking in real terror. We'll go to federal prison. You have to stop them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding. I'm your mother. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I just looked at her with nothing but cold, absolute pity. The woman who had terrified me for 14 years was suddenly incredibly small. I don't need your apologies, Donna, I said, my voice steady and quiet. I don't need your explanations, and you were never my mother. Haley, please. I just need you to leave me alone, I told her, looking at the woman who had closed the car door at JFK without a single backward glance. Permanently. I turned my back on her. I linked my arm through Sarah's, and together we walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind us with a solid final thud, instantly cutting off Donna's screams. 15 years of silence, fear, and shame had finally been shattered. We walked out into the cool Italian rain, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. You see, when you build a house on a rotten foundation, it doesn't just sink quietly. Eventually, it collapses loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to notice.
4 days after the hearing, an Italian investigative journalist who had been in the courthouse covering a high-profile mafia trial overheard the commotion in Judge Moretti's courtroom. She started digging. A week later, her explosive, heavily researched article ran on the front page of a major European paper. American banker attempts to steal 31 mil estate after abandoning adopted daughter in Italy. Sarah texted me the link with a simple message: grab some popcorn. Within 48 hours, the story went completely global. American news networks picked it up. Donna's Facebook page, once her carefully curated shrine to her own victimhood, was utterly destroyed under an avalanche of public hatred. She tried to delete the posts, but the internet never forgets. Robert was immediately fired from his wealth management firm. His corporate mask was permanently shattered. Based on Cynthia Davis's testimony and the judge's referral, the FBI officially opened a criminal investigation. The Abbotts were evicted from their elite country club, shunned by their wealthy community, and facing massive federal charges. They lost their expensive house to pay for their criminal defense lawyers. Part of me felt a cold, hard satisfaction, but a much larger part of me just felt incredibly quiet. Their destruction didn't bring my grandmother back. It didn't erase the terrified nights I spent crying myself to sleep in the Naples group home. They are getting exactly what they deserve, Sarah told me one afternoon as we drank coffee in my Milan apartment, watching the news coverage on my laptop. I know, I said, staring out at the rain, but the real victory isn't watching their empire burn. The real victory is my freedom. I never have to be afraid of them again. 4 months later, I officially packed up my apartment and moved into the Di Lorenzo Palazzo in Tuscany. I didn't quit my job. I loved engineering too much. I transferred to a regional office and worked remotely. But now, I had space to breathe. I had a sprawling, sun-drenched stone courtyard, ancient walls that had stood for centuries, and a breathtaking view of the silver-green olive grove where my grandmother had spent her final years, watching over me from afar. I used a substantial portion of the liquid assets to establish a massive educational foundation. I designed it specifically for teenagers aging out of the Italian and American foster systems, kids who, like me, were about to be dropped into the world with nothing. I named it the Elena Di Lorenzo Foundation, after the mother I never got to know. We provide housing, university grants, and mental health support. I am building them a foundation that won't crack. The rest of the money I invested safely, not because I needed millions of euros to be happy, but because it represented my grandmother's fierce, protective love, and I wanted it to last for generations. In late August, Sarah came down from Milan for a long weekend. We sat on the warm marble terrace as the Tuscan sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the hills. We ate fresh, warm bread dipped in the rich, peppery olive oil pressed from trees my grandmother had planted 40 years ago. "Have you heard anything else about the Abbotts?" Sarah asked quietly, pouring us both a glass of sparkling water. "Nothing direct," I said, leaning back in my chair, feeling the warm breeze on my face. "Their lawyers are fighting the FBI indictments, but they're drowning in legal fees. I heard they live in a very small, cheap apartment in Nevada now." I smiled. It was a genuine, relaxed, whole smile. I don't think about them at all anymore. The next morning, I drove out to a quiet, beautiful cemetery in Rome. The air was still and peaceful, scented with pine and dry earth. My mother's grave was simple but elegant. Right next to it was a fresh grave, my grandmother's. I sat down on the soft green grass exactly between them. For 2 hours, I just talked. I told them about my latest engineering projects. I told them about the foundation and the kids we were helping. I told them about the absolute peace I had finally found in the palazzo. "I wish I could have hugged you both," I whispered to the warm marble stones, tracing my grandmother's name with my fingers. "But I am so incredibly proud to be a Di Lorenzo." A soft breeze swept through the tall cypress trees, rustling the leaves like a quiet answer. I closed my eyes and chose to believe they heard me. 1 year after the mediation, I wrote a single public post on my old social media account to close the chapter forever. I was adopted as a financial investment at 3, discarded like trash at 17, and spent 14 years building an unbreakable life from absolutely nothing. When my biological grandmother left me an inheritance, my abusers tried to take it. They lost everything. But this isn't a revenge story. Hating Robert and Donna would mean they still hold power over my heart, and they don't. Family is not defined by legally binding adoption papers or by who fed you out of basic obligation. Family is who shows up. It's who protects you in the dark. Setting fierce, unapologetic boundaries is not a punishment, it is self-preservation. Being alone by choice is 1,000,000 times better than being surrounded by people who only value your existence when it's profitable. You are not defined by the people who broke you. You are defined by the magnificent life you build from the pieces. The post was shared over 60,000 times. A month later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Morgan. She told me she had finally moved out of her parents' toxic orbit. She was attending intense trauma therapy, learning how to untangle the lies we were both raised in. She asked if we could occasionally get coffee the next time she visited Europe. I typed back a single word, yes, not as sisters, but as two survivors finally finding our way forward in the light. If there is one thing I hope you take away from my life, it's this. You do not owe anyone your loyalty just because they hold a title like mother or father. Words are completely meaningless without the solid daily actions of unconditional love to back them up. Sometimes the bravest, most beautiful thing you will ever do is pack your bags and walk away from the people who were supposed to love you. Stories like this one, rooted in brutal betrayal but ultimately defined by profound resilience and justice, remind us of the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. If walking through this dark but empowering journey with me resonated with you, I invite you to leave a like and subscribe. By staying connected, we can continue to share these deep, truthful narratives of survival and triumph. Drop a comment below to share your own story of building a new foundation. Let's remind each other that we are never alone in the dark. Protect your peace, build your own foundation, and take care of yourself.